Ever since humanity first emerged across the vast grasslands of Africa, we have gazed upwards to the heavens and asked ourselves, which is better, the Enterprise D or an Imperial-class Star Destroyer? Could the Galactic Empire take over the Federation, and are the Borg able to adapt to the Force? Put these questions to 100 of the world's greatest philosophers across history, and you'll get 100 different answers. In truth, there are some things that mankind was perhaps never meant to know, and which is better, Star Trek or Star Wars might be one of them. But in this episode of Incoming, I'd like to discuss one aspect in which I believe Star Trek is clearly superior to Star Wars and a lot of other alternate worlds as well. Before you smash that dislike button though, hear me out, because I will bet that even the most ardent supporter of the Galactic Empire is going to agree with me by the end of this. Before I convince you that Star Trek is superior, we'd like to thank the sponsor of this episode, Skillshare. If you've ever wanted to start working on your own alternate world, Skillshare has the tools and classes to help you out. The first 500 people to use the link in the description will receive 2 free months of premium online classes. Okay, so why is Star Trek better? Is it something cool like weapons technology or military strategy? No. It all has to do with polarity in international relations. Wait, don't go anywhere. I recognize that probably sounds boring, but just stick with me here. So first, what is polarity in the context of international or interstellar civilization? Well, if you imagine all the cultural, economic, industrial, and military power in the world, solar system, galaxy, or whatever the case may be, polarity is how that power is distributed between different nations. Now, there are 3 major ways in which this can happen. The first is unipolarity. In a unipolar world, one single nation exercises a majority of cultural, economic, and military influence. This nation might be described as a hyperpower, with no significant rivals. While other smaller states may exist, they wouldn't pose any realistic threat. An example of this from our own world would be the United States of America, immediately following the collapse of the Soviet Union, or maybe the Roman Empire at its height. The second is bipolarity. In a bipolar system, power is concentrated in 2 often rival states. These 2 superpowers often develop spheres of influence, competing with one another to gain support in neutral areas, while simultaneously engaging in proxy wars and political machinations to destabilize their opponent. An example would be the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The last system is multipolarity. In a multipolar world, numerous great powers possess nearly equal amounts of military, cultural, and economic influence. This often leads to the rise of complex alliances, attempts to maintain a balance of power, and the risk of small conflicts escalating into full-scale war. An example from our own world would be the early 20th century, in which France, the United Kingdom, Russia, the United States, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Ottoman Empire all competed with one another across the global stage. So, where do some alternate worlds fit into all this? For most of its history, the Star Wars galaxy has existed in a unipolar state. The Old Republic, Galactic Republic, and Galactic Empire all exerted near total control with no significant rivals capable of matching them economically or militarily. A brief exception occurred during the Clone Wars with the establishment of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and while the situation between the New Republic and First Order is rather murky at the moment, in general, the Star Wars universe is a unipolar one. The Halo universe would be categorized as bipolar. Both the United Nations Space Command and the Covenant possessed enormous military and industrial capabilities, and while they were not completely equal technologically, each side was able to sustain itself in a war lasting over 25 years. It should be noted, however, that in victory, the UNSC has likely become a hyperpower in its region of the galaxy, and the Halo universe is shifting towards unipolarity. Now, Star Trek, by contrast, exists in a perpetually multipolar state. Over the centuries, great powers have risen and fallen, but no single state has ever gained complete superiority over the others. The United Federation of Planets, Klingon Empire, Romulan Star Empire, Cardassian Union, the Dominion, and many others are perpetually competing with one another for power and influence. Because all 3 of these systems have emerged across our own world, I won't argue that one is inherently more realistic than any other. But when it comes to which is the most interesting, multipolar is the clear winner. In my opinion, the more great powers that exist, the more compelling an alternate world becomes. There emerges greater opportunity for political maneuvering, shifting alliances, proxy wars, regional power blocks, arms races, and all sorts of things that just don't exist or are far less likely in the other two systems. Let's look back at Star Wars. The Galactic Empire embarked on an enormous militarization campaign, building tens of thousands of warships and enormous superweapons. In its entire history, however, it was bogged down in a guerrilla campaign against a rebellion that could never hope to match its military power. Wouldn't it have been more interesting if the alliance to restore the Republic was being financed by some other superpower, one the equal of the Galactic Empire? Maybe one that was just as brutal as the Empire itself and manipulating the alliance to destabilize its major rival? What if the entire galactic civil war was more akin to the Vietnam War or the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan? A sideshow in a much greater ideological struggle between two superpowers. Basically what I'm saying is, wouldn't it be cooler if both sides had enormous fleets of warships and apocalyptic superweapons? So while I think a bipolar system is an improvement over a unipolar system, there can still be some problems. My main issue with a bipolar universe is that it inevitably winds up as a unipolar one. There simply aren't that many avenues to explore. Either one side will win or the other. Once the Covenant were defeated, there didn't seem to be any major threat to the UNSC, and while opposing forces have since arisen, they seem to me to be at least pretty convoluted and contrived. The UNSC Covenant War, in my opinion, also wasted a lot of the potential of a bipolar system. What if both the UNSC and Covenant were trying to convince some other non-aligned nations to join their cause? Or what if some equally powerful nation was just waiting on the sidelines for its chance to intervene and take out both its rivals in a single strike? To be fair, the splintering of the Covenant into several competing smaller states has addressed some of my concerns, but the UNSC still seems to be unrivaled, and the Halo universe has gotten a little less interesting. So that brings us to Star Trek. Politically, one of the most interesting alternate worlds because it is continually evolving and never stagnant. The United Federation of Planets emerged from a coalition of smaller regional powers, becoming in an instant a major player in interstellar politics. Its rise alarmed both the Klingon Empire and the Romulan Star Empire, who attempted to destabilize it through war and espionage, and eventually entered into a sort of anti-Federation alliance. The collapse of that alliance had the Romulans retreat into isolation, and the Klingons embark on an ever-escalating cold and occasionally hot war against Starfleet. Their prolonged military buildup ruined the Klingon economy, emboldening the Romulans and forcing the Klingons to eventually sign a new alliance with their once-hated enemies, the Federation. The Federation found itself overstretched and unable to deal with a proxy war funded by the Cardassians, while simultaneously defending their borders against a resurgent Romulan presence and sporadic attacks by the Borg. This already unstable web of interstellar politics was upended entirely with the arrival of the Dominion, with former enemies becoming allies and allies becoming enemies. Even before the end of the Dominion War, certain elements in the Federation were already preparing for the next major conflict. The Star Trek galaxy is continually evolving, it is not defined by a single conflict, and there is no end to its story. My point is that the more complex a political system, the more opportunities for interesting stories. I don't know if the USS Enterprise is better than a Star Destroyer, but in terms of galactic politics, Star Trek is way better than Star Wars, Halo, and so many other alternate worlds. If you'd like to build your own alternate world, you'll be able to find some helpful classes over at Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with more than 25,000 classes in design, business, and more. If fueling your curiosity, creativity, or career is one of your passions, Skillshare has got you covered. We'd recommend Storytelling Fundamentals, Character, Conflict, Context, Craft by author Daniel Jose Older, and Fictional Universe Storytelling, Outline Your Epic Adventure by Michael Delgado. It's also super affordable. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month, so join more than 7 million creators on Skillshare. The first 500 people to use the link in the description will get a free 2-month trial of Skillshare Premium. So even though I've certainly convinced you that Star Trek is superior to Star Wars, at least when it comes to space politics, that is just my opinion. An infallible rock of absolute truth standing firm in an ocean of uncertainty. If you disagree though, we'd still like to hear from you. What are some other great examples of a multipolar, bipolar, or unipolar universe? Is Star Wars just as politically interesting as Star Trek? Does Halo have an interesting future ahead of it? Should I have mentioned that other Star Wars timeline where all my arguments don't apply? Let us know in the comments, and until next time, this has been Incoming.
The Templin Institute investigates alternate worlds and realities. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to directly support us, vote in polls to determine future topics, and receive some cool rewards, please consider pledging to our Patreon page.